Jason Whitman's footsteps echoed softly on the polished tiles of Derek Harlow's hallway, though it was clear the house was far from empty. Music thumped faintly from the living room, mingling with bursts of laughter that suggested a gathering larger than the casual hangout Derek had described over the phone. Jason paused, hand hovering over the doorknob, a wave of nervous anticipation mixing with curiosity. It had been months since he'd last seen Derek, and yet the thought of stepping into his cousin's world now felt like crossing into someone else's life entirely. When he finally opened the door, the sight that met him was both familiar and disorienting. Derek's friends, 3 of them, were sprawled across the couch and chairs, drinks in hand, talking over one another in a way that made the space feel alive, almost chaotic. There was Ethan, with his easy grin and casual confidence, Miles, whose sharp humor and quick wit drew everyone's attention, and Tristan, the quiet one with an intense gaze that seemed to weigh everything in the room. None of them acknowledged Jason immediately. It was as if he had entered another orbit, and for a moment, he wondered if this visit was a mistake. "Hey," Jason said, his voice a little louder than intended. The group paused, turning their eyes toward him, sizing him up with polite curiosity. Ethan's grin widened. "You must be Derek's cousin." "I'm Ethan." His voice had a warmth that eased some of Jason's tension, though not all of it. "I'm Jason," he replied, shifting awkwardly, his bag slung over one shoulder. Miles raised an eyebrow but offered a nod. Tristan merely inclined his head slightly, his expression unreadable. Jason couldn't help noticing the subtle dynamics between them, the ease with which they interacted, the small jokes that only they seemed to understand. He felt like an intruder, though Derek had invited him. Jason's eyes swept across the room. Posters adorned the walls, a mix of abstract art and band flyers, giving the space a youthful, rebellious energy. On the coffee table lay scattered video game controllers, a half-finished deck of cards, and an assortment of snacks that hinted at the casual yet intimate nature of the gathering. It was Derek's world, lively and unpredictable, and Jason realized just how different it was from the quiet, structured evenings of his own apartment. The initial awkwardness gave way to small talk. Jason asked about school, Derek's recent work projects, and the music playing in the background. His questions were met with short, friendly answers, though he sensed a subtle undercurrent. Derek's friends were curious about him, just as he was about them. Ethan leaned back with a lazy smile. "So, Jason, do you come by often, or is this your first time experiencing Derek's chaos?" His tone was teasing, but not unkind. Jason laughed softly, a little self-consciously. "First time," he admitted. "I didn't expect, well, this many people." He gestured vaguely to the room. Miles chuckled, running a hand through his hair. "Derek likes to make sure it's never boring. You're in for a fun night, I guess." As the conversation unfolded, Jason tried to relax, but he couldn't shake a strange feeling of being observed, as though Derek's friends were silently assessing him. It wasn't uncomfortable, exactly, it was more like the pressure of an audience whose attention mattered more than it should. He caught himself stealing glances at Derek, who had yet to appear, and wondered how his cousin would react when he finally walked into the room. Time seemed to stretch as Jason adjusted to the rhythm of the group. He noticed how Ethan's laughter seemed to pull everyone in, how Miles' jokes could shift the energy in an instant, and how Tristan's quiet presence created a balance to the room's liveliness. Each of them, in their own way, exuded a confidence that Jason hadn't realized he was measuring against his own insecurities. He felt drawn into the orbit of their camaraderie, even as a part of him longed for the familiar connection with Derek. Just as Jason began to settle, the hallway creaked behind him. Derek appeared, framed by the doorway, and the energy in the room subtly shifted. His presence had a gravity that neither the laughter nor the music could overshadow. He smiled, a brief, knowing expression that hinted at secrets Jason wasn't yet privy to. "Hey, Jason," Derek said, his voice casual but carrying an undertone that made Jason's pulse quicken. Jason returned the greeting, feeling a mixture of relief and tension. Derek's eyes scanned the room, briefly meeting Jason's gaze before flicking to his friends, who responded with nods and murmurs of acknowledgement. Jason realized in that moment how much Derek's presence commanded attention, not in an overbearing way, but with a natural charisma that seemed effortless. The conversation resumed, now with Derek in the mix, and Jason noticed the subtle changes in dynamics. Ethan and Miles shifted slightly, giving Derek space, while Tristan's quiet observance remained constant, as if silently tracking the flow of interactions. Jason felt a complicated mixture of admiration, curiosity, and an unexpected flutter of something else he couldn't quite name. Hours passed in a blur of laughter, stories, and the occasional teasing glance between Derek and his friends. Jason found himself observing more than participating, cataloging small gestures and subtle interactions. Each glance, each laugh, seemed to layer more meaning onto the evening, hinting at relationships and connections that were both familiar and foreign. By the time the group began to settle into more relaxed positions, Jason felt a growing awareness of the tension in the room, not uncomfortable, but palpable. He realized that tonight was not just a visit, it was an initiation into a space he had never occupied, a glimpse into a side of Derek's life that was vibrant, unpredictable, and just a little dangerous. As Derek leaned back in his chair, Jason allowed himself a moment to take it all in, the music, the energy, the laughter, and the quiet yet undeniable pull between them. He knew the night was far from over, and the curiosity that had drawn him to Derek's house now surged with something deeper, something he wasn't ready to name. And then Derek's gaze met his again, longer this time, carrying an unspoken question, a silent challenge. Jason swallowed, his heartbeat quickening. The room felt smaller, the music louder, and the air charged with possibility. He didn't know what was coming next, but he sensed that this visit would change something in him, and perhaps in Derek too. The music softened slightly as Derek leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Jason. There was something in the way he studied him, a quiet intensity that made Jason feel both seen and unsteady. He wasn't sure if it was curiosity, challenge, or something else entirely, but the effect was undeniable. For a moment, the chatter around them faded, leaving only the subtle rhythm of the room and the tension between them. "Glad you made it," Derek said finally, his tone casual but layered with meaning. Jason nodded, fumbling slightly with his hands, unsure how to bridge the gap between familiarity and the charged energy in the room. Derek's smile was disarming, warm, yet edged with an inscrutable charm that drew Jason in even as he reminded himself to stay composed. Ethan, sensing the shift, broke in with a joke that drew laughter from the others, and the momentary intensity dissolved into the background noise again. Jason found himself observing more than participating, cataloging Derek's movements, the easy way he engaged with his friends, the subtle ways his gaze returned to Jason when he thought no one was looking. Each glance carried an unspoken dialogue, a conversation without words that stirred feelings Jason hadn't anticipated. The evening stretched on, a fluid mix of stories, teasing banter, and quiet observations. Jason noticed Miles leaning back, smirking as Derek recounted an exaggerated story about a recent outing. Tristan, still quiet, seemed to watch Jason more than anyone else, his dark eyes thoughtful and sharp, as if he were assessing not just Jason's presence but the undercurrents between him and Derek. Jason felt a curious mixture of exhilaration and anxiety. He was stepping further into Derek's world, a space that was vibrant, alive, and slightly dangerous, not in a threatening way, but in a way that challenged the boundaries Jason had set for himself. He realized he was paying attention to things he normally wouldn't notice, the subtle inflections in Derek's laughter, the ease with which he could shift attention from one person to another, the magnetic pull he seemed to exert over those around him. At one point, Derek excused himself to the kitchen, and the room's energy shifted immediately. Ethan tried to keep the conversation light, but the absence of Derek's presence created a palpable gap. Jason felt a mixture of relief and disappointment, relief that he could relax without Derek's gaze, and disappointment because a part of him had been waiting for that attention, that subtle acknowledgement that made his heart race. Minutes later, Derek returned, carrying 2 glasses of sparkling water. He handed one to Jason, their fingers brushing briefly. The contact was fleeting, innocent in appearance, but Jason's pulse betrayed him. Derek's eyes flicked toward Jason, and there was a spark there, something unspoken, a quiet invitation that both intrigued and unsettled him. He wondered if Derek knew the effect he had, or if it was entirely accidental, a natural extension of his charm. As the night wore on, the friends began to leave one by one. Ethan excused himself with a grin and a promise to see them soon. Miles disappeared to answer a call, leaving only Tristan, who stayed silently on the couch, observing. Jason felt a tightening in his chest as the room emptied, leaving just him and Derek. The atmosphere shifted again, heavier now, charged with the intimacy of solitude. Derek sank into the armchair opposite Jason, studying him with a subtle curiosity. "So," he began, his tone light but carrying weight, "what do you think of the evening so far?" Jason hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "It's different," he admitted. "Lively. Energetic. And, well, I didn't expect it to feel so intense." Derek's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Intense?" he echoed, tilting his head. "Do you mean the energy in the room, or me?" His question hung in the air, teasing yet charged, and Jason felt heat rise to his cheeks. He realized then that the tension between them was no longer subtle, it had grown, threading itself through every glance, every pause, every unspoken word. Jason's thoughts raced. He had always known Derek to be charismatic, magnetic even, but seeing him in this context, watching how he could command attention and yet still anchor it subtly on Jason, was different. There was a draw, a pull that went beyond familial connection, something that made him both nervous and exhilarated. He wondered where Derek's intentions truly lay, and whether he was imagining the tension, or if Derek had deliberately created it. Tristan, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "You two seem to have a lot to talk about," he said, his tone neutral but carrying an edge of insight. He stood, stretching slightly, and with a nod toward Derek and Jason, excused himself. Jason felt a pang of both relief and disappointment. Derek's friends were gone, leaving him alone with Derek, alone with the unspoken possibilities of the evening. Derek leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You seem thoughtful," he said softly, eyes locked on Jason. "What's going through your mind right now?" Jason swallowed, unsure how to articulate the swirl of curiosity, nervousness, and attraction he felt. "I'm not sure," he admitted honestly. "It's a lot to take in." Derek nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I get that," he said. "I just want you to be comfortable. And honest. With me, and with yourself." There was an intimacy in that statement, a subtle invitation that went beyond words, suggesting that the night was no longer just about visiting, it was about understanding, exploring, and confronting feelings that had perhaps been dormant until now. Jason's pulse quickened. He realized that this evening, intended as a simple visit to his cousin's house, had become a journey into uncharted territory. The mixture of curiosity, admiration, and tension was almost overwhelming, yet he felt a strange clarity as well, a sense that whatever happened next would be significant, shaping the boundaries of his relationship with Derek in ways he had not anticipated. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence filled only by the soft hum of the air conditioner and the distant sounds of the city outside. Then, slowly, Derek tilted his head, a hint of mischief in his expression. "You want to see something?" he asked, not revealing what, but the tone carried a promise of intrigue, a suggestion that the night was far from over. Jason hesitated, heart racing, caught between curiosity and caution. And yet, something in Derek's gaze, something in the charged air of the now quiet room, drew him forward. He nodded slightly, a silent agreement to follow the moment wherever it might lead. As Derek gestured toward the hallway, Jason felt the tension peak, not threatening, not dangerous, but electric. He took a slow breath, aware that this was a turning point, the threshold between familiarity and the unknown. The night had begun as a simple visit to a cousin's house, and now it was poised on the edge of something far more compelling, intimate, and suspenseful, and in that instant, Jason realized that once he stepped forward, there would be no turning back, not entirely.